Hi, I'm Mr. Simons, and in this exclusive walkthrough, we're going to go through one of the toughest games out there, the 2017 New South Wales Economics HSC. Let's get into it. So in this video, which is going to be part one of a three-part series, what we're going to do is we're going to go into section one of this exam, which is the multiple choice. Now, if you're not familiar with the setup of the exam, there are 100 marks on offer, and section one is 20 marks, which equates to 20 multiple choice questions. So we're going to go through each in turn. We're going to look at how you might answer the questions, any tricks there might be. Sorry, not tricks, any nuances or challenges that there might be. And then we're going to give you the answers as well. So why don't we start with question number one. Okay, so here we are with question number one. And it says, which of the following is most likely to be of benefit to transnational corporations? Okay, so which of the following are going to give benefits to TNCs? Let's have a look. Number one, increased trade barriers. No. Number B, variations in regional business cycles. This is one of those ambiguous responses that may or may not be relevant, so I'm just going to kind of leave a note next to it, as in, let's have a think about that. Restrictions on international financial flows, that's not going to help. Restrictions are going to harm. D, migration laws that encourage international labour mobility. Well, what this is going to allow is and this fact is going to be really positive for TNCs. So D is our answer for question one. So here we are with question number two. In theory, love that, in theory, which of the following best describes the characteristic of a public good? Now, when I'm given a term, even before I look at the answers, I like to write down what that means. So I know that public goods are non-excludable and non-rival. So if I look down here, all I need to do is say, non-excludable and non-rival. And there's their answer. And then we arrive at question three. Which statement about the time lags associated with government policies is most correct? So time lags. Okay, cool. First one, fiscal policy has a longer implementation lag than monetary policy. This sounds pretty true because it's going to take some time for fiscal policy to be implemented through which takes place in May each year. Whereas with monetary policy, there is a meeting every month. B, microeconomic policies have a shorter impact lag than fiscal policies. No, microeconomic policies take a very long time to have an impact because they're quite large and very expensive. C, monetary policy has a longer impact lag than micro. It's also not true because monetary policy has its impact much more quickly than micro policies. Micro policies have a shorter implementation lag than monetary policy. So that's really kind of the opposite situation, or the same situation expressed in the opposite way as D. So fiscal policy has a longer implementation lag. So here we are with question four, which says an economy is experiencing high unemployment and an inflation rate below the central bank's target rate. So inflation is below that 2 to 3% target band. So which macro policy mix is best for this economy? If I'm looking at these two factors, I'm thinking that the economy here is it's a bit sluggish. So what could be useful is if we give the economy a boost to try and reduce unemployment, and also we can afford to increase inflation a little bit more. Here we are at question 5. So, other things being equal, Australia's international competitiveness, so we're thinking about how successful its exports are on world markets would be improved, right? So we are increasing international competitiveness by an increase in what? So here we're looking at, so we're trying to increase competitiveness by doing what? If we increase domestic inflation, that will hurt international competitiveness. If we increase aggregate supply, that would increase in aggregate supply, lower prices, higher quantities, that would actually improve international competitiveness. If government spending is increased, we don't know where it's being spent. It depends on where it's being spent in terms of whether it would improve international competitiveness. And if the value of the dollar goes up, well, that is like kryptonite for international competitiveness. That's a Superman reference, but I don't even really like Superman. Anyway, we're looking at B for 5. Welcome to question 6. Question 6 reads, which of the following is most likely to be included in a market-based policy for the management of air pollution? So when I see market-based policy, what I'm thinking is that we are using price to incentivize or de-incentivize behavior. So a more simple way, we're using price to try and get people to do things or stop people at doing things. But it's prices, not like fines or charges. It's that market price, demand and supply. Okay, let's have a look at what we've got. So 6A, fines. Fines, that's not a market-based policy. That's not involving demand and supply and price mechanism. It's just like a penalty. If I look at firms buying and selling pollution permits, well, then they are engaged in that market process. They are buying permits, they are selling permits, that is affecting the price, that is affecting behavior. So that seems pretty good. C, well, that's regulation. That's not market-based. That is rules set by the government. And D, well, that's an international treaty. So you can see here that even if you weren't sure about B, you can discount A, C, and D quite easily. Here we are at question 7. Which of the following would most likely be driven by fluctuations in the business cycle? Cyclical elements, not structural, but cyclical. Cyclical meaning that they are driven by the economic cycle. So cyclical, yes. Structural, no. Okay, if we increase the rate of the GST, that is something deliberate by government. That is because it's the rate. It's not the amount that's collected, it's the rate. An increase in the tax-free threshold, again, that is deliberate action by a government. It doesn't really matter what the economy does. A decrease in company tax receipts, well, that looks good because we know that when the economy is slowing down, businesses are making less revenue, recording lower profits, so therefore paying less tax. A decrease in the marginal tax rate, again, because it's rate, that is set by government. That is structural. Question 8. This reads, which of the following is most likely to occur if the Australian government finances a budget deficit by borrowing funds in the domestic money market? So remember that we can finance a budget deficit. So we can finance the deficit by borrowing from within Australia or from borrowing from overseas. Now remember that if the government borrows funds in the domestic money market, that is likely to have an impact on all the people that are trying to find money locally. This is going to have a crowding out effect. And what it's going to do is that it's going to put upward pressure on interest rates because the government is coming in and borrowing all those funds, the borrowable funds in the economy, leaving nothing for anyone else because lenders would prefer to lend to the government, who is very reliable and likely to pay back their money because, well, they're the government. Question 9 is a little bit like a mini boss. So it's not quite the big boss in the level, but it's a mini boss because quotas. So whenever I see quotas, I'm easily confused, not just with quotas, more generally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the quota diagram. So if the government is going to reduce the import quota, let's say we start at S. If it reduces the import quota, then it's going to shift that way. There is going to be less imports coming in, which equates to higher protection. So if we look at it there, well, the revenue of foreign producers won't increase because they can sell less. The domestic price of the product will increase. Well, that's probably true because there is less of it. Because remember, they are reducing for a product. You could say, let's say this product, Yeezy 350s version 2, so that if there is less coming in of the Yeezys, well, the price of that product is going to go up. C, domestic firms will produce less. Well, if they can, they would probably produce more because there are less imports, which means there's more demand they could fill. And the market share of foreign producers isn't going to increase because they can bring in less. Oh, question 10. Which of the following is the minimum requirement in order for an adult worker in Australia, very important, to receive the national minimum wage? So when we're seeing the national minimum wage, we're thinking here, well, that is part of the... So it's part of the national employment standards. Those 10 basic conditions that all workers are entitled to. So in order to receive the minimum wage, you just have to be employed. You could get more than the minimum wage, and that would be really lovely. But you are entitled to the minimum wage just by being employed in Australia. Question 11, and here's one where I do feel like the examiners might be trying to catch you out. So let me explain that. Let's have a look at the question first. Which of the following must have happened if there has been a movement in Australia's terms of trade from 115 to 105? So the terms of trade has deteriorated. So we know here that the price of exports has declined relative to the price of imports. Now remember that the terms of trade is all about price. So can you see here for A and B that the key term here is value? The value is not something that is covered by the terms of trade. So we can just discount A and B right from the start. That's where I think they're trying to fool you. So we know here price. Okay, these are our actual options. So can we see here the price of Australia's imports increased relative to the price of Australia's exports? Well, that is the only situation, that is the situation that would have definitely caused a deterioration in Australia's terms of trade, right? Not the only situation, but a situation that would have definitely caused it. So here, we're going to say C. So question 12 was a little bit of a controversial one. Some economics teachers did disagree about what the answers were or where they were going with this question. But in terms of the question itself, what it's saying is, which of the following correctly ranks from largest to smallest the sources of income as a percentage of Australian household income? Now, in terms of the answer, the answer in the HSC, I have to even look at it to try and remember it, was B. So that returns to labour, wages were the highest source of income, followed by transfer payments, and then returns to land and capital, and returns to enterprise. So this is the order to know in terms of the sources of income that households receive based on their kind of relative weight or relative importance to a household. So welcome to Lucky 13. The situation we're given here is there is a downturn in the economy of a major importer of Australian goods and services. So basically what we're seeing here is, so there is a fall in the economic growth of a major trading partner in Australia. So a consequence of that is there is going to be a reduced demand for Australia's exports. Because if the trading partner is growing more slowly, they will demand fewer exports. So if there is less demand for Australia's exports, well then the value of the Australian dollar will fall because people in that major trading partner will need fewer Australian dollars because they're buying fewer exports. Question 14. 14, leakages and injections. So for 14, we can see government spending, imports, taxation, investment, exports, saving, and they're all kind of mixed up. So basically what we're looking at here is, so we're looking at the relationship between these two things here. So if we add up the numbers here, so leakages are greater than injections. So we could see here that D is a possibility. It is contracting because leakages are greater than injections. Well, it's not expanding because we know leakages are greater than injections. It is contraction because savings are greater than taxation. No, it's not contracting because savings are greater than taxation. Both of them are leakages. It is expanding because exports are greater than imports. But it's not. Because even though exports are greater than imports, the whole economy is contracting. Okay, question 15, lots and lots of numbers. Table shows employment data for a hypothetical economy. My favorite kind of economy. So you can see here that we've got working age population, employed, unemployed. In which year, they're going to make me go through all of the years, is the unemployment rate 40% and the participation rate 62.5%. Okay, what I might do is to start with is put an extra column and call this the unemployment rate. So for each of these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the number of unemployed over the total labour force. So here this would be 1 on 3, right? Which obviously equals 33%. So 1 unemployed over 3 labour force. So year 1 is not in our consideration set because unemployment is not 40%. Year 2, so this will equal 2 over 5 equals 40%. So year 2 is a possibility. Now year 3 is where we've got 3 over 10. 3 over 10. So that equals 30%, and that is not possible. So let's see whether they're going to be a bit sneaky and make us do another set of calculations. So here I've got 6 over 15. So you can see here they have been a bit sneaky because they're giving us 2 to choose from. So what we have to do now is we have to calculate the participation rate. So the participation rate equals the number of people working over the number of people that could work times 100. So all we need to do is work it out for both years. So if we look at year 2, so year 2 is our winner because the labour force participation rate is 62.5%, just as they ask for. So we arrive at 16 and we're starting to see a bunch more of the calculation questions. So the table shows CPI data for a hypothetical economy. Again, my favorite type of economy. So you can see here that we've got the CPI. Year 1 to year 3 prices rise. So A is not an option. Now, if we're looking at here, this is where we're going to have to work it out. So what we can do is we can just do this for each of the years. So what we can see is that the inflation rate is increasing. So it is going up, but it is increasing at a decreasing rate. Okay, question 17, and we are deep in the calculation questions. So the table shows hypothetical balance of payments data for a country. Okay, great. We know We've seen this before. It's familiar. So assuming a floating exchange rate, fine. Which of the following statements is true? So A, the balance of goods and services remains constant. Okay, so if we put it up here, go 1, and then we'll go 2, and we're looking at bogs. So in year 1, the balance of goods is -10 and services is -20. So it's -30 billion. And then in year 2, it's -10, then -30. So that's -40 billion. So I was just focusing on these things here for that. So it's not constant. Okay, I thought they would ask us this. The current account deficit decreases from year 1 to year 2. Okay, so if we go year 1 and year 2, and we're looking at the CAD. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at all these different things. So we know that the BOGS is 30, -30. And then we know that net primary income and net secondary income, that's going to give us -70. So that's going to give us -100 billion for that. Then if we go to this side, so we know -40 BOGS, and then if we look at net primary, net secondary, -90 equals -130. So the current account deficit actually increases between these years. So that's not true. So we come to C where it says the net errors and omissions are larger in year 2 than year 1. So remember that the net errors and omissions is the balancing number that helps to balance the current account and the capital and financial account. So if we look at year 1 and year 2, so in year 1, we can see that the balance on the capital and financial account is 95, right? And we know that the CAD is -100. So net errors and omissions, what it takes for them to balance each other, will be 5. Now let's do the same process for year 2. So for year 2, the CAFA is 120. And we know that the CAD is 130 minus. So we know that net errors and omissions will be 10. So we can see here that net errors and omissions in year 2 is actually greater than in year 1. So C is looking good. And then D, the capital and financial account surplus decreases from year 1 to year 2. So if we can see this here, we know that the capital and financial account surplus in year 1 is 95 and 120 in year 2. So it actually increases between the years. So our only possible answer is the net errors and omissions. Now this is a fair amount of work to do for 1 mark, but this is really what you could be expected to do when you get to this part of the paper. So hopefully it wasn't too traumatic. Here we are at question 18. And question 18 needs a little bit of context. That in the 2016 HSC, there was a question that confused a lot of people that had this similar issue. So in 2017, they asked another question along the same lines to try and show the logic, I think, that they were getting at in the question in the previous year. So what we can say here is that it can be argued that a book in a public library is not a public good. Not a public good. Okay, so if we think about a public good, so a true public good has characteristics of being non-rival and non-excludable. So which of the following best supports this argument that it is not both non-rival and non-excludable? Well, people can borrow a different book. It's not really helping us. Only one person can read the book at one time. This is looking good because if one person can read the book, well then everyone are rivals for consumption. So they are actually rivals because if one person has the book, well then another person can't have it. And remember, a public good is both non-rival and non-excludable. C says anyone can be a member. Well, anyone can be a member means non-excludable, which is a characteristic of a public good. D, the contents of the book do not change. That's not really relevant here. Question 19. Question 19 is our first big boss of this walkthrough. So we're going to need all of our skills to try and tackle this question. It's not easy. So this is one of our famous multiplier questions that I know we all love and adore. So here we got national income and consumption for that lovely hypothetical economy. They've been very kind and they've told us that the value of the multiplier is 2.5. And then what's missing here? Z and X. So now we have to find what they are. So what I'm going to think about is that if I know what the multiplier is, let me go back to the multiplier formula. Then what I can say is that, so I know that 2.5 equals 1 on marginal propensity to save. So therefore, MPS equals 0.4. Now this is a pretty handy start for us. So then what we can say is MPC equals 0.6. So just to go back over it, all I've done is I've taken the multiplier formula, I've added the number that they've given us, and then I've just solved it. So there's MPS and there's MPC. So then we can actually use these numbers to try and solve our issues here. So what I know is that the marginal propensity to consume is equal to the change in consumption over the change in income. So 0.6 will equal the change in consumption, which we don't know yet. The change in income between these years, well, that is 1,000. So therefore, the change in C is going to equal 600. So it's going to change by 600. So therefore, Z is going to equal the change plus what it was. So Z is going to equal 700. So what we're going to do, you can come over here. So again, what we're going to say is we know that MPC, the marginal propensity to consume, is the change in consumption over the change in income. So we know again 0.6 equals the change in consumption here, which we can see here between now, if this is 700 to 1300, then that will be 600 over the change in Y. We don't know that yet. So then what we can say is that 0.6 change in Y equals 600. So the change in Y equals 1,000. So if the change in Y equals 1,000, then X will equal the change in Y plus what Y used to be. So that will equal 1,000 plus 1,000, which will equal 2,000, which gives us D. Okay, here we are at our final question. So let's have a look at what we're being asked. It says that in 2019, $1 buys $1.25 Australian. In 2020, $1 Australian buys 75 US cents. Okay, so they're playing around a little bit because these are expressed in different ways. So let's try and make this a bit consistent. So what we can see here is if I've rearranged it to bring it down to $1 Australian, we can see that in 2019, $1 Australian buys 80 US cents. And then in 2020, $1 Australian buys 75 US cents. So what we can say here is that the Australian dollar has depreciated between the 2 years. Now I feel like we understand what's happening, that we can go back now and look at the responses that we choose from. So if you look at A, there is no change in the exchange rate. Well, that's not true. In B, Australian exports to the US are less expensive in 2020 compared to 2019. So Australian exports to the US are more competitive in 2020 compared to 2019. This is a possibility because if the Australian dollar has depreciated, that means that exports are cheaper. So that's possible. Goods imported from the US are more expensive in 2019 compared to 2020. Imports are actually more expensive in 2020 because the Australian dollar has depreciated. So in 2019, they're actually cheaper. So C is not possible. D, for US investors, Australian assets are more expensive to buy in 2020 compared to 2019. If the Australian dollar has depreciated, then Australian assets are going to be cheaper to buy in 2020 compared to 2019. So our answer for Big Boss number 2 is B. Okay, so this was our big exclusive walkthrough of the 2017 New South Wales Economics HSC multiple choice section. Hopefully this was useful. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment. Make sure to subscribe because parts 2 and 3 will be coming along and you do not want to miss those. Okay, thank you so much for watching.